Hi, this is Ann Benson, and I'd like to introduce you to the basics of Euro bead crochet, also known as double bead crochet. This is a stitch that is very popular in Europe and Eastern Europe, where there's a thriving design community. Essentially, it's tubular bead crochet with a single beaded crochet as the workhorse stitch rather than the slip stitch with which we've all become familiar. Before we get into the details, let's just look at the basic stitch on an established tube. Insert the hook into the whole stitch, which means both of the top threads. Bring a bead down the thread so it nestles against the fibers. Wrap the thread up and over the front of the hook and pull through to form a loop, so there are 2 loops on the shaft of the hook. Now wrap the thread over the top of the hook and pull through both loops. The bead is now secured to the crocheted tube in a diagonal position. That's the basic stitch. Insert, bead down, wrap under and over, pull through, wrap thread over, and finish the stitch by pulling through one more time. In this example, I'm using cotton crochet thread, specifically Sibelia 30 weight. Size 12 and 16 pearl cotton are also great threads for this technique. I'm using size 11 seed beads, in this case Japanese, but you can mix both Czech and Japanese beads in one project. I do it all the time. The hook I used is a size 10 steel, 1.1 millimeters, but sometimes I use a size 11 or 12, which is 1 millimeter. And this depends on how much coffee I've had that day or how much wine I've had that day. Let's assume you've already threaded your beads according to your design's specific directions. Start with a slip knot, leaving a tail of maybe 6 inches. Wrap the thread around your finger and pull up a loop. Take the slack out of the loop, not too tight, so you have a movable knot on the hook. Start with a chain that has one more stitch than the circumference of your design. Bring forward the beads of the first round and separate them from the rest. This will make it easier to check the accuracy of your first round. Now insert the hook into the first chain and bring a bead down the thread. Wrap the thread around the hook and pull a loop through the first chain. You'll now have 2 loops on the hook, and the bead has been captured so it sits diagonally on the outside of the tube, which is the whole point. Wrap the thread around the hook again and pull the thread through both loops. That's your first stitch. Repeat this all the way around the chain. When you reach the starting point, you may see a bit of a gap. This is normal. The first chain is unstable because of its starting tail. Here's how your first round will look. Start your second round in the first stitch of the first round. Do not step up. Because the bead slants clockwise, you may think you've crocheted in the wrong loop. This photo shows how the completed second round will look. And here is a close-up of 3 rounds, each worked in a different color. The blue dots are the first stitches of each round, and the green are the last. Everything has shifted a bit. This is correct. Once your pattern emerges, you'll be able to see in the resulting design if your work is correct. But until then, you should count the stitches after every couple of rounds. This photo shows 16 beaded stitches. The first few rounds are going to be messy. There's no getting around it. In fact, in my first attempt, I looked at the first few rounds and said to myself, my goodness, why am I even bothering? But have faith and stay with it, and after a few rounds, it will settle down and a tube will emerge. The most important thing is to be sure you maintain the circumference. If you're crocheting a simple all-over repeating pattern, it may be shown as a visualization of the tube's appearance, alongside bead images in the pattern's order. More complex designs may show an overview of the pattern with rows stacked on each other. The circumference of the pattern will be the number of beads shown in the narrower of the stacked rows, in this case 18 around. There may be times when you need a few rounds of unbeaded crochet tube to accommodate a closure that sits flush with the beads. In that case, just start and continue in the same manner, but don't slip a bead. Keep track of your circumference as diligently as you would with beaded stitches. And now you have a tube, but it's collapsing on itself. We'll add internal support to the tube's channel to keep it attractively cylindrical. Some crocheters like to use rigid tubing in the channel, but I prefer a fiber bundle because it offers two distinct advantages. First, you can add and subtract fibers to get the Goldilocks fit. Second, a fiber core remains more flexible than a rigid core. You can literally tie your tube in knots if you so desire. As you get into longer tubes, you'll begin to understand that bead crochet in all forms is an exercise in thread management. I recommend using a winding card with 2 holes in which your hook can be inserted while holding your loop and threaded beads safely intact. For very complex or large designs, it's a good idea to thread in sections. If you're threading from a stacked pattern, divide it into sections first. Then start with the bottom section, as the last bead added will be the first bead crocheted. In a 3-section stack, thread the bottom first, top to bottom, left to right, then the second section in the same manner, and finally the top. If you're threading in sections or correcting an error, you'll need to know how to join a new thread. On the established tube, pull out a tail of 6 to 8 inches and cut the thread. Now pull in a loop of thread from the new section. Secure both thread tails against the tube with a tape that can easily be removed. I like ordinary masking tape. Now continue crocheting with the new beads as if you had never stopped. Because the added loop will be a bit loose, take care to identify the correct loop for the first stitch of the new section. After a few rounds, secure the thread tails within the fiber of the tube and trim them. Don't run the thread through the channel itself because it will need to be open for the support fibers. A word of caution here. If you drop your loop and pick it up again, please be sure to check that you've picked up the right loop. To do this, pull on the beads of the last few stitches you made prior to dropping the loop. If you have the correct loop, the crochet will not ravel. If you have the wrong loop, the crochet will ravel immediately. Here are a few examples of how to finish these tubes. Clasps, caps, and bead and loop closures are all popular methods. You can even create your own bead caps in peyote stitch. So have fun with this. It's a lot easier than you'd think, considering the elegance of the outcome. This is Ann Benson. Thanks for joining me, and please join me again soon.